So you've got less than 30 days before your tournament. Chances are good you're probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed because you feel like there's no time left and that you're probably doing most of the work while the rest of the committee does very little. So the reason for this video is that we want to be able to take what you do have with committee support and the time that you do have available to bring in the most number of sponsors possible within the last 30 days. The reason this works is because most events take a very general approach to reaching out to sponsors. So they spend all of their time trying to reach out to everybody and bring everybody on board. Instead, what we want to do is to focus our attention on the sponsors that are actually going to come on board. So what we're going to look at doing today is setting it up so that you've got an action plan moving forward, so that you feel like you've got more control of the sponsors who are coming on board, and we make the most of the time that you do have. We've designed this video so that this whole thing should only take 10 minutes to complete the exercise, because we know that you don't have very much time. So what you're going to need is a list of potential sponsors, your current brochure or your sponsorship levels, and if you can bring everybody together, having committee members in the room is going to be very helpful. If you can't bring everybody together, you can still do the exercise, but we do recommend that everybody's together. If you need to, pause the video now to get everything in order. So the 3 steps we're going to look at in order to focus our attention on the sponsors who are going to come on board is to consider who we're reaching out to. So chances are good you've already sent out some mass emails, you've done some follow-up calls. So the question is, between today and tournament day, who are you still comfortable reaching out to? These may be sponsors that you've told you're going to follow up with them, or just people you have a better relationship with. Once you know who you're reaching out to still, the next thing we're going to consider as we continue to focus our attention is to say, what sponsorship level do we think those sponsors are willing to pay or come in at? Once we have a general idea of how much those sponsors are willing to pay, the final question we want to ask is, which committee member knows this sponsor the best? The more personal you make the ask, the easier it is and the more likely it is that you're going to bring a sponsor on board. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say this is my tournament. So what I've got is a list of the sponsors that I'm still going to be reaching out to, a list of my sponsorship levels, and a list of my committee members. So let's take a look at the first sponsor on the list. First question I want to ask is, what do I think the sponsor can afford? So I look at my sponsorship levels. What about the highest level? Do I think they can come into the gold sponsor? Probably not. $2,000 is a little bit too much for the hardware store. Well, what about the whole sponsorship? $250. That might be a little bit too low. I think they can afford more than that. Well, what about the bronze sponsor? $500. I think that's a safe bet. Right in between, not too expensive, but not too cheap. That's the one we're going to go with. So I write that down on my list. Next question is, who knows the sponsor best? Susan? Not really. She's maybe shopped at the hardware store a couple of times, but I don't think so. What about Chris? Well, Chris knows one of the employees at the store. He's probably a good bet. Oh, but what about John? Does he maybe know the manager or a decision maker? No, not in this case. Okay, so in this case it's going to be Chris who reaches out to the sponsor. Now, he's going to ask them for $500 sponsorship, but just in case they say no, we want to have a backup plan. So we're going to pick the next sponsorship level down as a backup. In the case of my sponsorship levels, this would be $250. Next step is to actually go through the entire list using the same approach. So we end up with something like this. A list of sponsors, a price that we think they can afford, and somebody on the committee who's going to be reaching out to them. The other trick here is that you've now got something specific to ask volunteers to do. So instead of saying, go and reach out to sponsors, which sometimes sounds vague and scary to some volunteers, you're now able to say, reach out to these sponsors for this amount of money. Now it's your turn. So start with the first sponsor on your list. Ask the question, can they come in at the highest sponsorship level? If that's too expensive, what about the lowest sponsorship level? If that's maybe a little bit too little and they can pay some more money, then keep going back and forth until you find the most reasonable price, something you'd be comfortable asking them for. Also, remember to set a backup. If you find that a lot of your sponsors, you'd be uncomfortable asking them for even the lowest sponsorship level, it might be worth considering offering a new lower level. Or if you find that there's too big of a gap between a whole sponsorship and the next sponsorship level up, perhaps it's worth setting another level in between those two. Also consider that different sponsors want different benefits. Some sponsors want golf, some sponsors want dinner tickets, some sponsors are going to want to talk at dinner. Other sponsors aren't even going to come to the tournament. So, once we have an idea of what sponsorship level is going to be appropriate for a specific sponsor, then it's time to ask who knows them best. So, for your committee and the specific sponsor, who on the committee knows them best? Think about personal relationships. Are they a friend or a colleague? Think about business relationships. Is this company one of your suppliers, a customer, or maybe an employee? Just as a reminder, it is helpful to have the whole committee at this meeting. But if not, that's okay too. So, let's take the next 10 minutes to complete your list. And just as a reminder, ask the question, who are we still reaching out to? What do you think they can afford? And who knows them best? Feel free to use the rest of this video, which has a timer, to count you down through this process. Try and keep it to 10 minutes so that you spend your time as effectively as possible. Let us know how this video worked for you as well. We always love feedback.